The room felt suffocating, the air thick with tension as I sat rigid, hands folded neatly in my lap, muscles tight beneath a calm exterior I forced myself to maintain. Jason's voice cut sharply through the silence, brash, confident, as he recited the contents of the will that had just been read aloud. His late father had left everything to him, erasing me entirely, as though years of devotion, sacrifice, and partnership had been invisible, easily wiped away by a single signature. The weight of his words crashed over me like a cold wave. The room seemed to sway, plunging into an unfamiliar stillness that I fought fiercely to ignore. Jason's smug smile only deepened, his pride swelling as he leaned back, arrogance exuding from every motion. The world owed him everything, he thought, merely because of a name, blind to the complex history behind this fortune now resting in his hands. The family attorney, composed and distanced, finally glanced at me, his eyes carrying a mixture of regret and a subtle warning. Then, with a discreet motion, he slid a small envelope across the table toward me. Its edges were sharply folded, light but hopeful, heavy with promise. "You might want to see this," he murmured softly, as if sharing a dangerous secret. A hopeful flicker of hope stirred in my chest, nervous, sharp, and unsettling. My heart hammered erratically, echoing the sudden constriction in my lungs. That envelope, what could it hold? A loophole in the will? Evidence of deceit? Financial records? Perhaps confirmation of the melancholic suspicions I had long buried, the shadow of infidelity that haunted my late husband's past. I squeezed my eyes shut a moment, nervous, fighting the rush of emotions, serious, determined not to let my face betray the turmoil inside. I knew I had to step away. "Please excuse me," I said quietly, rising from my seat, feeling the cold hardness of the floor beneath my heels. My voice was steady, but inside, an angry storm raged. I moved through the muted corridor, each step measured but burdened with a desperate sudden urgency. Once alone, I took the envelope from my bag and carefully opened it. Inside lay a mysterious trove of documents, legal notes, letters, bank statements, each piece a thread unraveling a hidden story. My trained eyes scanned them rapidly, seeking inconsistencies, weaknesses, anything that could tip the scales. A subtle clause caught my attention, one that suggested the will's validity depended on undisclosed conditions. References to debts and secret assets peeked through the lines, financial maneuvers Jason had arrogantly overlooked. Most piercing were the melancholy hints of my late husband's infidelity, hidden in private correspondence, evidence that could undermine the entire inheritance and Jason's claim to it. I felt the serious air grow heavier as the significance sank in. These papers were more than ink on fragile sheets. They were a confident weapon concealed in plain sight. The shock of betrayal I had felt moments ago began to transform into a fierce determination. Years of silent sacrifice, of putting Jason's needs before my own, of enduring his arrogance without complaint, surged within me. The quiet nurturer was being energetic by someone who would fight, with the knowledge and strength I had accumulated over decades. Memories of sleepless nights spent managing loans for Jason's education, of negotiating every expense to keep the family afloat, flickered through my mind. I remembered how I had smoothed over his mistakes and cheered his successes, even as the man he became turned away from me with disdain. Now, with this evidence, I had a hopeful way forward. My husband's betrayals, once whispered fears, now stood laid bare, raw, undeniable, a confident lever for justice. I folded the documents back into the envelope, feeling their weight, the gravity of what I held. Breathing deeply, I steadied myself. There was no space for despair, only careful planning. Jason had assumed victory, arrogant and sure, but I would show him that justice is not merely a right handed down. It is a weapon, sharp and precise, in the hands of those who dare to wield it. Returning to the room, I was no longer the woman who sat silently at his mercy. I was waking up from my long slumber of quiet endurance. I would fight to reclaim what was mine, not just the assets, but the respect that had been stolen with the stroke of that pen. This was my reckoning, and I was confident. The quiet of my home offered a stark contrast to the angry turmoil roiling inside me as I sat alone in the dim glow of the living room. The soft hum of the city outside faded into background noise, replaced by the echo of memories that seemed to flood in without warning. Reminders of choices I had made, battles I had silently fought, sacrifices buried beneath years of motherhood and marriage. In this solitude, I was forced to confront what I had given up for Jason, for a family that now looked to discard me like yesterday's news. I traced my fingers along the edge of an old photograph lying on the side table. Jason at 11, grinning wide as he held the keys to his first car, a rite of passage I had labored over to make possible. I remembered the countless hours poring over financing options, negotiating with dealers, sacrificing my own needs so that he could have those freedoms I never dared to claim for myself. How proud I was then, how I'd basked in his innocent happiness, unaware that the boy who clutched that steering wheel would one day use the family name as a weapon against me. I closed my eyes and found myself slipping back further, to days when the pain lay not in financial decisions, but in the heart. Those moments when I chose to forgive rather than confront, when my late husband's infidelities were whispered rumors that could have shattered everything. I had held the family together with nerves frayed thin beneath smiles and quiet resolve. I had been the anchor, the silent defender, while the man I loved drifted away into shadows I couldn't touch. Even divorce, when it came, felt more like an unspoken truce than a victory. I forged on, not just for myself, but for the boy who needed both parents to survive. Years of juggling work, school runs, and moments of fragile happiness later, I hadn't imagined Jason would betray me in the end. Yet here I was, betrayed not by a stranger, but by my own flesh and blood. His pride blind, his arrogance bred from the entitlement he felt as legacy. As these recollections churned, so too did a fierce clarity hardened inside me. I thought of every quiet moment I had set aside to ensure Jason's comfort. From the sleepless nights when I balanced bills and budgets alone, to the sacrifices I made to keep his college fund intact while denying myself. I recalled lending him money hidden in the guise of gifts so he could chase opportunities, only to see those opportunities angry twisted into tools for his own gain. Now, after all this, he dismissed me as obsolete, an obstacle in his path. My chest tightened at the thought, but I refused to let the grief consume me. Instead, it became fuel. I was no longer just a mother resigned to fate. I was a strategist poised for battle. Years of legal expertise flooded back, knowledge crafted in courtrooms, sharpened by negotiations, and tested by real losses. That training was not wasted. It was a weapon, begging to be wielded. I imagined the intricate dance of evidence, law, and negotiation I would embark on. My mind ticked through what I knew of wills, contestations, and the subtleties of estate law. The envelope's contents had revealed a chink in Jason's armor, a vulnerability born from his father's hidden life. The infidelities once whispered about in hushed tones were no longer secrets. They were leverage, facts to be summoned before judges and skeptics alike. I allowed myself to dwell on the irony. All those years of quiet endurance, of gentle counsel and unwavering support had birthed a son who believed respect was owed without effort, who mistook privilege for right. Now it was time for me to rise, not merely as the woman behind the scenes, but as an equal opponent. The house around me was a gallery of memories, worn sofas where arguments had been smoothed over, framed portraits bearing smiles that now seemed distant, untouched coffee cups collecting dust from hurried mornings. They symbolized a life lived in anticipation of family, loyalty, and love. But they also reminded me that I had hoped in vain for gratitude. That hope was a casualty, but not the woman I had become. I pictured the meetings I would call, the old colleagues I would reach out to, the detailed dossier I would compile to expose the invisible lines Jason believed protected him. Like a chess player, I began plotting my first moves, revisit old contracts, audit financial statements, question the validity of unspecified assets. Each detail mattered, every overlooked dollar or dubious signature a potential key to unlock my restored inheritance. In the midst of reflection, a quiet rage coiled inside me, not the explosive anger people might expect, but a cold, burning determination. I remembered countless times I had bitten my tongue, swallowed indignities, and watered down my voice for the sake of peace. That was over. Now I would speak clearly, firmly, and without hesitation. Yet even with this new fire, I hesitated for a moment, recalling the tenderness beneath all the steel. For Jason, beneath the arrogance, was still my son. That complex love was a fragile, aching cord, one I would not sever lightly. This struggle was just as much for his growth, to tear down the corrupted pride that threatened to ruin him, as it was for me. The night deepened as I sat in silence, letting these intertwining emotions settle into resolve. I considered how I would frame my challenge, not as a vendetta, but a hopeful quest for justice and rightful recognition. I would call upon every skill honed through years of courtroom battles and family negotiation. I would make them see the truth behind the inheritance, the true cost of silence, and the angry arrogance that sought to erase me. Finally, I rose, the weight of my memories balanced now by a sense of clarity and purpose. This was no longer about loss. It was about reclamation, about taking back not just what they thought they could steal from me, but the dignity that had been denied for so long. Tomorrow, the battle would begin, but tonight, I allowed myself the quiet strength of reflection, the calm before the storm. For I was no longer the mother who silently endured. I was an energetic woman, awakened, armed with knowledge, resolve, and a relentless will to reclaim the life and respect that had been stolen under the guise of entitlement. Days passed like the slow crawl of tide, inevitable and relentless. As I sank into the depths of research, letting the contents of that small envelope guide every move. The angry fury inside me sharpened into focus as I pored over legal texts, cross-referenced financial statements, and hunted down every fragment of evidence that could unsettle the fragile fortress Jason believed protected his ill-gotten claim. There was a loophole, a hopeful fracture in the legal armor, drilled deep enough to let light through, and I intended to pry it open with everything I had. The envelope's revelations about my late husband's secret life had pulled back a curtain I'd long feared to raise. Those pages were not just dry words. They were the hinges on a door that could change the entire narrative of the inheritance. The infidelities, a bitter, bruising truth I'd never wanted to invoke, were the fulcrum on which this fight would pivot. The law might be cold and impersonal, but it was also precise. If an heir was found to be unworthy due to deceit or hidden agendas, the hopeful scales could be tipped. Each morning began the same way. A cup of bitter coffee beside a growing pile of documents that demanded my attention. I retrieved contracts signed decades ago, scrutinizing clauses in my husband's old business deals, combing through bank records for unaccounted transactions. The more I dug, the clearer the picture became. Jason had been planting seeds of entitlement he never earned, blind to the tangled debts that could erode his claim. He was arrogant, yes, but careless. During one late evening at the office, I reread the will alongside correspondence I had discovered. Letters from a woman whose name I'd heard whispered at the edges of family rumors, but never confronted. There, in black and white, was evidence not only of betrayal, but potentially invalidating conditions in the will. The quiet demon of doubt that had haunted my thoughts suddenly became a tangible weapon. If I could prove the existence of alternate dependents or question the legitimacy of the document itself, Jason's sole beneficiary status would, hopefully, crumble. But this fight would not just be a matter of raw evidence. It required delicacy. This was family, after all, tangled in webs of loyalty and resentment. It was one thing to expose financial truths and another to tear at the emotional fabric that bound us all. I'd always been the peacemaker, the one who softened edges and mended fences. Now, armed with knowledge, I had to be strategic and resolute. Knowing the media's inevitable hunger for scandal, I cautiously reached out to a trusted journalist friend. I laid out the circumstances, emphasizing the need for discretion and control over the narrative. If the story reached the public eye, it had to be framed honestly, underscoring the hopeful quest for justice over salacious gossip. I would not allow my personal fight to be distorted or trivialized. The dossier I assembled grew thicker with each passing day, pages ordered chronologically, financial anomalies highlighted, correspondences cross-examined. This was no longer mere paperwork. It was a story of betrayal, negligence, and entitlement, meticulously documented for a courtroom and for a public unaccustomed to seeing the mother as anything but passive. My personal transformation underpinned this rigorous process. The woman who once endured quietly had morphed into a formidable force, relentless, strategic, and resilient. I no longer skirted around confrontations or accepted condescension. Each meeting I attended radiated confident strength, my voice clear, my arguments unyieldingly precise. The inevitable confrontation revealed itself sooner than expected during a family dinner. Jason's disdain was as palpable as a physical blow. "You're out of touch, Mom," he spat, dismissive and arrogant, his eyes flashing with contempt. The room grew quiet, every ear tuning in to the tension between us. But I met his gaze without flinching. "I know more than you think, Jason, and I'm ready to prove it," I said steadily. The air thickened with unspoken threats and an emerging challenge. It was the moment I had been preparing for. Beyond the quiet mother, I was the energetic warrior rising. The mask of family civility cracked that night, replaced by the tension of an impending storm. My professional instincts guided every next step. I tapped into my network, consulting trusted attorneys and financial analysts, absorbing their insights and expertise. Each new piece of information was another thread woven into the legal tapestry I was forming. This was a chess match played on multiple levels: legal, financial, emotional, and I had no intention of making a misstep. One discovery, in particular, gave me both leverage and somber pause. Hidden in an old family home's neglected corner, I found a weathered ledger. My late husband's journal of financial decisions and personal regrets. His handwriting was uneven, his remorse monumental. Each entry was a confession, a trace of the man behind the facade who had lived a fractured double life. This journal was more than evidence. It was a narrative device, humanizing the legal battles ahead and portraying the estate's complexity. It revealed not only betrayal, but also vulnerability, providing context that I could not ignore or dismiss. It was a reminder that no matter the fight, we were dealing with human lives and broken promises. My preparation extended beyond documents. I rehearsed presentations and imagined court scenarios. I anticipated every argument Jason's legal team might present: denials, dismissals, false claims. I prepared counters for each, refining my rhetoric, ensuring that each word would land with the weight of a well-aimed blow. Emotionally, the battle was grueling. Nights were restless, filled with the tumult of memories, pain, and strategic calculations. Yet, those restless moments forged the iron in my resolve. The woman who once nurtured silently had transformed into a leader who embraced her power without apology. I mourned the family that was unraveling, the love that was strained beyond repair, but I embraced the necessity of this fight. If Jason sought to wield his inheritance with arrogance and fraud, he must first prove worthy in the eyes of justice, which cared little for name or entitlement, but everything for truth and accountability. On the eve of the first formal mediation, I sat alone in the house that had once symbolized safety and continuity. The quiet was heavy with anticipation. The battle was no longer theoretical. It was immediacy, a gauntlet thrown into the court's arena. Yet, amidst the strain, a confident seed of quiet confidence grew. I knew I was prepared, not just with facts or evidence, but with a confident spirit unbreakable. This war was mine to fight and mine to win. In that stillness, I allowed myself a rare moment of peace before stepping back into the fray. I would reclaim my legacy, not just for me, but for the truth buried beneath layers of greed and denial. Tomorrow, I would rise, unafraid and unyielding. The day I filed the formal challenge dawned cold and gray, the chill creeping into my bones, but not dimming the energetic fire burning inside me. I dressed deliberately in a dark tailored suit, a quiet but unmistakable sign of the woman I had become: composed, resolute, unyielding. The envelope I carried was heavy, not from weight, but from the months of labor, loss, and revelation sealed within. Inside it lay documents meticulously gathered, legal papers revealing hidden assets, financial records exposing reckless debts, letters unmasking truths Jason hoped remained buried. The courthouse was a place of rigid formality, its marble halls echoing with the lives of countless battles fought and settled. But for me, it was sacred ground. As I approached the clerk's desk, my heart pounded, a steady rhythm matching the intensity of the moment. The pages exchanged hands, and with a signature, the fight officially began. I walked away from the desk a different woman, no longer the overlooked mother pushed aside, but a force awakened, ready to reclaim what was rightfully mine. Word of the filing spread swiftly through our intertwined circles. I heard it whispered at family gatherings, caught in the subtle shifts of conversation as acquaintances and relatives alike took tentative sides. Jason's usual cocky smile was replaced by a angry, taut scowl as the reality sank in. His confidence was fractured, replaced by a surprised disbelief that rippled through every interaction. Lauren's influence was felt even in my shadows. Whispers of threats and scorn reached my ears, delivered in hushed tones steeped in disdain. Yet I remained calm. Where they sought to provoke fury, I wielded the quiet strength of patience and preparation. Anger was a momentary spark. Calm resolve was a lasting flame. That evening, Jason confronted me at the family home. His eyes, cold and fierce, tried to intimidate. His words were barbed, filled with insinuations about my age and fading influence. I met him head-on, voice steady and layered with quiet power. "I'm not clinging, Jason. I'm claiming what is mine," I said, letting the weight of my months-long preparation settle between us like steel. The silence that followed spoke volumes. For once, his entitlement met unwavering resistance, and he sensed it. The legal battle that followed was intricate and grueling. I coordinated closely with my team, experienced lawyers, financial experts, and trusted allies who understood both the personal and legal stakes. Every document was scrutinized, every inconsistency highlighted. Phone calls stretched into the night, meetings debated strategy with careful calculation. We fortified our case point by point, understanding that this was not only a fight for inheritance, but for the angry truth that had been silenced. Jason's camp retaliated with fury and disbelief. Attempts to intimidate and unsettle me were frequent, but ultimately ineffective against my steady composure. I answered their aggression not with heated words, but with deliberate, measured actions that strengthened my position. Silence sometimes spoke louder than any outburst, and I chose it often, letting their desperation become their weakness. The fractures in our family widened with each exchange, the legal wars spilling over into difficult, painful confrontations beyond the courtroom. Jason's arrogance was failing him, his defenses cracking. Yet I felt no triumph, only a deep sadness for what we had become. The son I knew, or hoped to know, had become a melancholic stranger shaped by greed and pride. But I held on to the memories of years past, the sacrifices, the tireless work, the love despite difficulty. Those recollections fueled my will to see this through, not just as a legal battle, but as a reclamation of my dignity and the respect owed to a mother who had given everything. With renewed strength, I refined my case, organizing each piece of evidence, preparing for hearings that tested every ounce of my resolve. I moved forward with clarity and purpose, knowing the road ahead would not be easy, but determined never to relent. As the first mediation approached, I found brief moments of calm to gather myself. The fight was no longer abstract, it was imminent and real. But with every preparation, every rehearsal, I grew more certain of one thing. I was ready. Not just armed with evidence and resolve, but with a confident spirit that no betrayal could break. Tonight, amid the quiet of a house that held both memories and battles, I embraced a rare peace. Tomorrow I would rise, not as the woman cast aside, but as one unafraid, unyielding, and prepared to claim justice. This was my fight, my legacy, and I would see it through to the end. The courtroom was thick with a heavy stillness, the kind that presses down on your shoulders and makes every breath deliberate. My heart pounded, but I kept my hands folded in my lap, steady and composed. This was my moment, the culmination of months of unseen labor, quiet toil, and fierce resolve. I was no longer the woman who silently endured. I was here to claim my truth. As the judge took his seat, the room hushed further. I began my presentation, each word carefully measured, every fact laid bare with clarity and purpose. I spoke of hidden accounts, disputed debts, and the secret entanglements that had been concealed from the family and the court alike. I pulled from the envelope the documents that exposed the cracks in the fortress Jason had built on arrogance and entitlement. Jason sat across the room, his posture rigid, his usual, surprised, confident mask faltering as the evidence unfolded. I caught the flicker of unease in his eyes, a glimpse behind the bravado where uncertainty now clawed. The man who had dismissed me as irrelevant was visibly shaken as the financial mismanagement and deceit were laid out for all to see. When his lawyers attempted to discredit my claims, I met their skepticism with confident, calm authority. Each question was answered with precision, every doubt addressed with thorough evidence. My years as a family lawyer provided the tools I needed, not just knowledge of the law, but the ability to communicate the depth of my case in a way that transcended mere paperwork. At a crucial moment, I paused and looked directly at the judge. My voice softened but carried unwavering strength. I stood by this family through betrayal and sacrifice. I gave everything for my son and yet was cast aside. Pride and entitlement do not justify the erasure of a mother's rightful place. This is not just about money. It is about justice. The room fell into silence, the weight of my words hanging in the air. I saw the judge's eyes flicker with a nuanced understanding, and I knew that the battle was far more than legal argument. It was the recognition of an angry truth long denied. Throughout the hearing, I maintained a composed demeanor, despite the torrent of emotions roiling beneath the surface. The years of quiet suffering transformed into a steady current of purpose, and as I spoke, I felt a calm power, born from pain and resilience, filling the space between us. Jason's challenges grew more desperate as his confidence waned. His interruptions and objections were sharp, but lacked the conviction to overturn the mounting evidence. The courtroom registered the subtle shift, the hopeful scales tilting toward fairness. When the hearing adjourned, the judge offered no immediate ruling, but his words hinted at the gravity of my claims and the seriousness with which they were considered. I gathered my documents with hands steady and heart eased by a cautious hope. This was the moment I had fought for, the moment where silence gave way to acknowledgement. Walking out into the cool afternoon light, I drew a breath that tasted of both relief and anticipation. The path ahead remained uncertain, the fight far from over, but for the first time, the future felt like a place where justice might prevail. I reflected on the journey from betrayal to this precipice, and in that reflection, a happy satisfaction bloomed. I had reclaimed my voice, my dignity, and carved a space for truth in the shadow of arrogance. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but I was ready. Whatever came next, I would stand unwavering, an energetic, unyielding force summoned by love, loss, and the enduring pursuit of justice.